You've got more GPs that are going to have access to Pfizer now. The total vaccines, first doses now upwards of 8 million. It's almost 1 million a week. Almost 7% fully vaccinated now. So while that's low, it is on the up. You've got to admit it's on the up now. Things are gathering momentum and steam.
Well, we want to be on the up, Peter, because we're still running dead last in the OECD. 7% of Australians are fully vaccinated. That's a shockingly low figure now that we're in the 5th month of our vaccine rollout strategy. We've seen that there are particularly important cohorts of the population, aged care workers who are supposed to be fully vaccinated by Easter, who are still also running at shockingly low vaccination rates, which means, again, that this virus is escaping into aged care facilities. So I wouldn't want to see the government patting itself on its back. Of course, we're glad to see Pfizer getting into GP practices. They are a small number of practices in the overall scheme of things. The Victorian government has said that they're going to see a cut of Pfizer supply to their state, the second biggest state in the Federation, of 20% in the coming weeks. So we're still a long way from getting to where we need to be on a trajectory to vaccinating as much of the population as possible.
And Pat Murrell just made the point, Mark, too, that the government still can't answer the question of when under 40s will have access to a Pfizer jab. What does that do for planning? What does that do for uncertainty? Because they're faced with this question, well, do I go and jump the gun now and go and get an AstraZeneca, but there's 3 months in between shots? Or do I wait it out for a Pfizer jab?
Well, this is the whole problem with the strategy. For months now, the Prime Minister hasn't taken the Australian people into his confidence and set out clear targets and clear milestones. Frankly, that was what was completely lacking from the so-called plan that he announced last week, which we've seen from a wave of business leaders this morning. The lack of detail, the lack of timeframes and milestones means that everyone really is sort of muddling their way through this because the Prime Minister's not being clear with us.
OK, well, in your view, what should those timelines be?
Well, it all depends on supply, and we're still hostage to the fact that Scott Morrison was desperately slow in striking deals with vaccine companies last year, and we're still paying the price for that. You know, we're still essentially, particularly for under 40s broadly, but also for under 60s as well, we're still essentially hostage to Pfizer supply. And although we're told the supply will ramp up over the course of this month to some degree, we're still only getting a few 100,000 doses per week of Pfizer supply into the country. That's nowhere near where we need to be. And I make the point that although, of course, under 40s are desperately keen to know when they're going to get access to a dose, we've still got large numbers of the most vulnerable populations in the community, disability care residents, aged care staff, as I've said before, and a good number of older Australians still haven't been fully vaccinated. Now, this group, all of those groups were supposed to be fully vaccinated before the dangerous winter season where respiratory illnesses are much more pressing, much more dangerous. So there's still a job of work to do in the more priority phases of the vaccine rollout strategy.
Tim Wilson on the show a short time ago mentioned that his figure that he's got in mind is somewhere above 60% before you start transitioning to the second phase. Does that number sound reasonable to you?
Well, I'm not going to take my medical advice from Tim Wilson. That might surprise you, Peter, but we've got some very smart medical experts at the Doherty Institute that have been commissioned by the Australian government to start to do some modelling on this. We've got a great team of epidemiologists in the private sector working for different governments who can give us this advice. And it's also not theoretical. We're starting to see real-world experiences in the UK, for example, where they have had an effective vaccine rollout strategy and life is starting to return to something like normal up there. So let's wait and see the modelling. I wish we'd had it before now, frankly, because without it, without milestones, without clear vaccine targets and a plan about how we get to those targets, really the announcement the Prime Minister made last week was pretty meaningless.
OK, well, you mentioned the UK there, and in 2 weeks it's going to have its Freedom Day, and that's based on the fact that 2/3 of eligible adults have been vaccinated. So is that a reasonable target for you, 2/3?
Well, I want to see the modelling. I want to see the modelling from our own epidemiologists here because no country is the same. In addition to the 2/3 of people in the UK who've been fully vaccinated, unfortunately, a very substantial number of adults in the UK also have natural immunity because they've got the virus, which reflects the degree to which the virus spread through that country and through the US and a number of others as well. We're in a very different position. We don't have substantial levels of natural immunity, the antibodies that you produce because you've had the virus in the first place. So we are going to have to rely very much on vaccination. So let's have a look at the modelling that's that's crafted around Australian circumstances and then go from there. But frankly, the Prime Minister should be moving quickly to this. We are still desperately behind the rest of the world in getting to a position where we can see life returning to normal in Australia.
You did mention some business leaders who have been vocal this morning, and one of them is Innes Willox. And we had an epidemiologist, Tony Blakely, on the show a little bit earlier too, who said maybe there's a little bit too much emphasis that's being placed on a so-called magic number at the moment. Now, Innes Willox makes the point that if there is this so-called magic number, let's say it's 80% or whatever, then aren't we just then hostage to vaccine hesitancy and deniers? Does he have a point there?
Look, obviously, that is a really important point. I know Dan Andrews has made the point as well. But, you know, these are the sorts of discussions we can start to have once we have that clear advice from the epidemiologists and a picture from the Prime Minister about how he's going to do his job and actually get those vaccines into people's arms, how he's going to make sure we've got proper quarantine facilities that ensure that the community can remain safe from lockdowns that we seem to be experiencing so regularly right now, which the government's own budget papers say we can expect every month for the rest of the year. So Innes Willox makes a really important point. As I said, Dan Andrews made the point as well. But those are discussions I think we can only meaningfully have once the Prime Minister has done his job and laid out some meaningful data before the Australian people.
All right, Mark Butler, good to have you with us this morning. Thanks for your time. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, mate.